to this panel, what's going to be a very exciting 1 hour and a half that I'm going to be guiding you through. I'm Isabel Kumar, and this is the Domino Effect, boosting development to bring about a more inclusive digital entrepreneurship in our society. Now, just a little note, this session is being broadcast in a number of languages. It's being interpreted simultaneously into French, English, and Spanish. Now, this is also a conversation. We want to hear from you. So if you're listening in, do please send us in questions, and you can do that via our chat. And our team behind the scenes will curate those questions and send them over to me, which I'll pose to our panelists at the end of our session. Now, we are going to be shedding fresh light on how digital and inclusive entrepreneurship can be a force for inclusive growth and development. And we're going to hear from entrepreneurs, government representatives, and members of the international institutions and civil society as well, about how to challenge the status quo to ensure that everyone can reap benefits from the digital economy. We'll look at what can be done to increase entrepreneurs' success in the digital economy, how everyone can benefit from this, including women business owners, embracing frontier markets and leading the next stages of global digital transformation. So there's clearly a lot to discuss, a lot of areas to cover. We've got some fantastic speakers with us coming from right around the world. So I'm just going to introduce everybody. When I say your name, just give a wave so people can identify who you are. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Isabelle Durand, who is the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, joining us from Geneva in Switzerland. Dorothy Tembo is Deputy Executive Director of the International Trade Center and is also in Geneva. Alexa Roscoe, Disruptive Technology Lead at the International Finance Corporation, is joining us from Washington, DC. Hi there, Alexa. We also have Daniel Lagarde, who is Vice Minister of Foreign Trade of Ecuador, and he is in Quito in Ecuador. Titi Akinola is Director of Operations at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and she joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. Armina Ali is CEO of Airside, and she is in Arlington in the USA. And Ulane Vilumets is Head of Business Development, e-residency in Estonia, and she is in Tallinn, Estonia, although I think from our conversation, you actually are in Marrakesh. So a very international team with us today, and what an exciting conversation we've got to come ahead. Now, Isabelle Durand, who is, as I was saying, the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, has championed inclusivity throughout her career. Now, today, with technological advance and the imperative is increasingly lying in ensuring inclusivity, that it's fully integrated into the next stages of global digital transformation. And it is my pleasure to invite Isabelle Durand to make our opening address.
Merci, Isabelle.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. This is a second Isabelle taking the floor. I'm going to be speaking French, and I am aware that you can connect to the interpretation. So first and foremost, wherever you are in the world, since this is an extremely international panel, good day to everyone. Welcome to this e-trade, e-commerce for women, and this is something that
parce que vous avez dit, Madame la modératrice, il faut challenge the statu quo.
So we are going to try to repeat everything that was said since the beginning of the week about the importance of e-commerce, the importance of enterprises, how they can overcome some of the efforts, how the pandemic has affected them. In fact, I would like to go straight to the core of the subject, and that is that beyond the pandemic, digital entrepreneurs have shown a number of things, not only their ability to trade, but also to offer more innovative solutions and to discover markets that up until that point had not been exploited at all, that were responding to groups that had often been neglected by the more traditional operators. And this was an important advantage of the digital side where women have excelled. For example, there are numerical digital models that have been put in place, payment systems that provide financial systems to people who have been excluded up to this point from all banking sectors. And there are examples in all sectors, not only in the banking sector, but also in agro-tech, in health, logistics, transport. But it's clear that digital doesn't have access in the same way and able to become a digital entrepreneur. There are many inequalities, and our research and our experience in the field show us that digitalization as we know it now is accentuating these inequalities between economies and companies and within as well. In one category that is particularly a victim of both women and living in even worse. The reasons for these discrepancies are different. These are socio-cultural norms sometimes that are biased, or economic structures that are a bit rigid. For example, I can give you a few figures just to give you an idea of what I'm saying. We have very marked the differences as far as access to internet. The least developed country, 20% only of women use internet to 80 companies that are looking for risk capital were founded by men. 90%, that is, founded by men. Fewer women are in the upper level posts in the digital area, regardless of the sector or the region of the world concerned. All of the earlier in the non-digital world. So something must be done. We have to take measures to remedy these discrepancies. We have to help entrepreneurs, in particular women, so that they can adopt the digital technologies. And this means to understand their needs and guarantee access, portable and reliable connection, resources. This is changed. We have to change perceptions, in fact, and allow me to be even more radical now. Yes, women can become involved in this sector. Yes, women can create and grow online companies. Yes, the rural and agricultural world can draw benefit from the digital side to improve its revenue, income, numerous examples, and they have to be made more visible examples, because if there's no visibility, women simply vanish. They're not on the radar screen anymore. But it is high time also to realize that it's not enough just to say these things. We have to do them. No, women are not a vulnerable group that would only be a group that would deal with household business. They are a very solid potential for economic development in their community. No, it is absolutely not normal that if there's a project which is led by a woman and she goes to a bank to get a loan, she has a handicap, and of course, and people will laugh her out of the bank. I think we have to change this sort of practice. It is not normal that certain legislations dealing, perhaps dealing, for example, with property, dealing with the ability, credit for borrowing money is not the same for women and men, and that is where we can change situations, and not only by making women more visible or having a very nice speech about the gender equality in the digital area. We know that there are pioneers in this area, and all of these women that we're going to hear today are going to be explaining to us how they were able to have their digital companies work, how they prosper, what their obstacles were. And I'm sure they'll have more to say than I have about the concrete obstacles that we have to overcome to make this digital system more equal. So I'm very happy. I look forward to this discussion we're going to have today. I hope that it will be useful for everyone and that it will have a wealth of information.
Well, that was a very interesting introduction, really outlining the fact that the disparities we've seen in terms of equality in the physical world translate and are worse when you translate that into the digital world. And it's time for action. And as Isabelle Durand said, we have got real life examples to share with you today. Now, among the International Trade Centre's top priorities is ensuring trade is more sustainable, inclusive, and digital, thus improving the lives of the most vulnerable. Now, you saw Dorothy Tembo, I think, on the side of Isabelle Durand, and she is with us today. Dorothy Tembo is the Deputy Executive Director of the International Trade Centre, and she's going to take the floor of our virtual stage. And in her keynote speech, she's going to address how digital entrepreneurship can be a force for women's economic empowerment.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good afternoon to everyone. Firstly, I just wanted to thank UNCTAD for the invitation for us to be part of this conversation. As always, it's a great pleasure. But more exciting for me is the fact that we may not be many in this room, but this is the first time I'm getting to UNCTAD physically. I'm talking about the physical presence. Physically, to be able to see Isabelle, who I haven't been able to see for a long time, and many of you around the table. So it's really nice to be here. And one from this can tell that you can never substitute for seeing each other in real life. It's equally important. And to the extent that we can, we continue to do this. With respect to the question that has been put before me, this afternoon, I just wanted to say the first thing I have to say is that emphatically, yes, it is important, and digital entrepreneurship can be a force for women's economic empowerment. For some, this might be obvious, but I thought the next few minutes I spent to try and unpack this by sharing 4 key points that I had prepared for the conversation this afternoon. I think we have heard the details from Isabelle. The overall situation of women's inclusion in different spheres, particularly their integration in the economic empowerment activities, remains low. The facts were tabulated, and we all are very aware from the different conversations that we have had. The second point I wanted to make is that there's good news. Good news is about this shift to the digital, one that had been in motion before, but obviously massively accelerated by the COVID pandemic. And in all the gloom and doom that we have been subjected to or have had, experiences with, it has in many ways created a window of opportunity that is enabling improved economic opportunities for women, particularly the small players and indeed those that are home-based businesses. Again, I will not dwell on the details because these have already been addressed in the introductory remarks. Our research, which we conducted 3 years ago before the pandemic kicked in, we found that women are twice as likely to start and run an online business as the offline alternative. This we have proved in the current context, and this is one that certainly can have scope for growth if we were to leverage each other's strength and ensure that through our partnerships, we can be able to respond by providing the necessary technical assistance that we have been providing in the last two years and has proved a point or the findings of what many have determined in the past. I think not only have we proved that the trend has shown an upward trajectory, it has also proved that during the COVID context, this has been a lifeline for most of the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and for women in particular, who have been particularly dependent on online channels to run their businesses. The work we have been doing as part of the She Trades initiative, which is a women empowerment program that we have, has indeed shown us that this can happen when the right support is provided and you're there to give the holding hand for the women to do the business. Our message, therefore, this week, starting from yesterday, when my executive director participated in one of the panels, is that the future of market access for small businesses is via digital channels and digital platforms. This is even more so for women. Digital is now the key link between trade and economic empowerment. In acknowledging that, we know that it also gives the flexibility and presence to build businesses, particularly the small ones, but more importantly, to create the jobs that we talk about and to provide the support to their families and indeed the extended community. We have also done studies previously which have shown the value of empowering women. That benefit does not only come directly to the individual that is involved in the business, but it is about the family, it is about the community and beyond. So that investment to me is one that we should really be taking into consideration as we provide that support. This brings me to the third point that I wanted to make, which is in part also was touched on in the opening remarks. The story is good, meaning we've had some women that have been able to benefit by doing business online. But we also know that we have not been able to optimize that situation. The switch to digital has not entirely corrected the gender imbalance that we are aware of. In 2021, the IFC and others showed us that there's a significant gender gap in e-commerce. And this is what we have to address. And I think Isabel spoke to this as well in her remarks. I mean, definitely there are women online, but they are fewer than their male counterparts. Closing this gender gap, on the other hand, can yield tremendous benefits. And as an example, in my home continent of Africa, this could yield nearly $15 billion by 2025. That's how significant this potential is. But the barriers are still there. Some were elaborated just a short while ago. But I would categorize these into four main aspects. One is the finance, and here it's the access to the funding that is available, and that was also very well explained. So from my perspective, it's about the cost, but it's also about the requirements that are demanded of the small businesses in relation to accessing this finance. Two is the lack of skills to transition or to pivot the different businesses onto the digital side of things. And here, I think with these two is where we and UNCTAD and many other partners can come in. The third element is the infrastructure, including the actual connectivity or access to this. It's about the cost again there, but it's also about having that infrastructure being available. And coming from a country which is, in a situation where that need is very much there, it is critical that as we work in terms of intervening at the country level, we are coordinating the efforts with those that would have to make sure that the infrastructure side is also addressed, be it the public sector, the private sector, or the non-state actors, because this is an intervention that requires to be comprehensive, to be impactful, and you cannot resolve one side of it and not deal with the other. The final point are the social and cultural constraints that Isabel again spoke to. I wanted to say that organizations such as UNCTAD and ourselves come in to help, by sharing some of the work that we are doing, but also by being there to give the hand-holding that we do in the countries together with our funders and indeed many other partners. And I wanted to come to my fourth and final point, which was to illustrate what we do and how this has been, supportive, but also delivering results on the ground that we believe can be scaled up and be able to provide greater outreach and be more impactful. First is that we have been working over a decade now with the Netherlands Trust Fund programs implemented by ourselves, where we have promoted women entrepreneurship. And through this program, we have helped increase the share of women in leadership positions in the digital sector through policy advocacy, capacity building, and indeed access to finance. In Senegal, we created the Boctec umbrella organization, consisting of different Senegalese associations promoting women entrepreneurs in IT. The organization supports women entrepreneurs to innovate, share their experiences, build networks, enhance their capacities, and commercialize their digital products and services. Third, we have partners with the Women's Investment Club in Senegal to increase the ability of 76 women-owned businesses to access finance, also working with dozens of female angel investors. Beyond the financing, of course, what remains important is that we are also addressing the policy aspects that are related to all these issues. If the environment is not enabling, we will still fall short of our aspirations, and it is important that we do this. And we're doing this in South Africa, in Nigeria, where we are training not only business support organization to deploy training and coaching based on our ITC's eConnect model. We also have projects in Kenya, Ghana, and Gambia, and I will not go into detail. But I just wanted to draw your attention to our shetrades.com, where we have women buying and selling their products online through SheTrades Marketplace. Connect to potential investors and indeed access the learning programs that are a substantive part of the support that we are giving. I wanted to close by saying we do have an opportunity, particularly for the African continent. I think the CFTA presents a great opportunity for us to work on the digital trade and create platforms and markets to support African SMEs. We can make that difference. And I completely concur with what Isabel says. The opportunity is there. Let's try and embrace this, leverage this through the partnerships and support countries to transition completely to online business, to make it possible to be more inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dorothy Tembo there, giving us a message of good news in the fact that under that dark cloud of COVID, there has been that accelerated shift to digital, and also the message of the yield. Bringing women into e-commerce could bring $15 billion by 2025. So we've got a lot to discuss there, because closing the gap between men and women in the digital space, as we were hearing, is full of economic opportunity. Well, Alexa Wasco, the disruptive technology lead at the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, is clear-eyed on how women can realize their full potential in the e-commerce domain. And I'm delighted that Alexa is with us now. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. And if the slides can be pulled up, that would be great. But I'll be here speaking to you today, picking up on just that point we've heard about this kind of financial opportunity for closing gender gaps in e-commerce. And in fact, it's not just a $15 billion opportunity in Africa. Looking at Africa and Asia, we found at IFC that it's a $300 billion opportunity. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we get there and actually how we can achieve this $300 billion in growth. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. Great. Well, I'm going to, as we've heard a little bit today, women are really coming into the digital economy with some pretty serious handicaps in terms of financial and digital inclusion. So what we really tried to set out in this report was to figure out for the first time to what degree women were able to actually overcome these and participate in e-commerce, but also, whether, these digital gaps, financial gaps left women behind, or whether the digital methods actually help them overcome them and really kind of leapfrog into the next level of commerce and entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So to get there, we were able to take a really unique approach, which was combining data from the e-commerce platforms Jumia and Lazada, as well as detailed surveys in 5 countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. So this gives us a really good view of not just, theoretically what women are doing, but actually where are women on e-commerce, what their aspirations are, and how they're performing. Next, please. Great. And as I've already hinted, we did find that the opportunity here is substantial. There's a $300 billion opportunity to grow the markets just in Africa and Southeast Asia, and just for the 6-year period between 2025 and 2030. This means if we can close these gaps now, the future opportunity will be even bigger. Next slide. Great. So what's happening now? As we've heard, women are on e-commerce, and really what we found was that women are really active participants. This is a comparison between women on e-commerce and kind of women with registered businesses. So not a one-to-one comparison, but using the data that's out there. And we saw in a number of markets, women are actually already at par, or even in a couple of cases, just almost beginning to exceed men's participation in e-commerce. But there are still a couple of markets like Indonesia, Cote d'Ivoire, where there are quite substantial gender gaps, where the women represent about 1/3 of e-commerce sellers. And that means those are the markets where we really need to hone in and support women entrepreneurs to make use of this kind of burgeoning opportunity. Next slide. And it's not just women getting on e-commerce for the sake of e-commerce. We're really seeing that going digital does change the game. And it does that in 4 key ways. First, it's helping women to start or grow businesses, or really just to shift online. We saw the women who are participating in e-commerce are those who are actually mature entrepreneurs. Generally speaking, this isn't their first business off the bat. They're already in the markets and really looking to grow and to kind of get new customers. And e-commerce can help them do that. The second opportunity is that they're encouraged to enter sectors which are currently male-dominated. One of the reasons that women's profits and revenues tend to be lower than men's as entrepreneurs is because they're in less high-growth sectors. So for instance, we saw, a woman in Nigeria who told us when she went to sell electronics in the market, she got a lot of pushback from the other men who were there. But when she sold online, she could sell to absolutely everyone. The third advantage is really accessing business support services such as training or accounting tools. And these are all tools that women valued more than men. That means the more that the e-commerce platforms can integrate accounting, customer management, et cetera, into their platforms, the more that will appeal to women entrepreneurs. The fourth opportunity is personal. Really, it's around kind of flexibility and reaching personal goals. And that's particularly been important in the context of the really high and wildly disproportionate care responsibilities that have fallen on women in the context of the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So these, like I said, there's a lot of advantages here, but we did also see that COVID-19 disproportionately impacted women entrepreneurs. really in the years before the pandemic, women's revenues were really starting to compete with men's, but that got mitigated or even completely reversed during the first year of the pandemic. For instance, we saw in Africa, women's sales dropped by 7% at the same time that men's sales rose by the same amount. So that there's a real challenge here. And of course, it's been a particularly depressing few years on the gender front. That being said, I prefer to look at this as from a more optimistic perspective, which is that women were already on the road to success before the pandemic, which means there's a really practical and reachable opportunity to turn this around and really get to that $300 billion that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So how do we get there? I want to flag 5 specific opportunities. The first is recruiting, right? Particularly in those markets like Ghana, like Cote d'Ivoire and Indonesia, where women are currently like a small minority of entrepreneurs. But we specifically want to highlight the opportunity to recruit women from social commerce. So many women entrepreneurs get started by selling via Facebook message, by WhatsApp, from whatever kind of the local platform is. But those services generally don't have the type of scale or necessarily the support that a formal e-commerce platform does. So helping women shift from social commerce to e-commerce can really help them grow their businesses. The second is on training and promotions, right? So again, women valued training, business and technical training more than men. But they also sometimes didn't know exactly where to start in e-commerce. For instance, we saw that women were less likely than men to invest in terms of advertisements that would help boost their products in a really crowded marketplace. So helping women invest strategically to stand out can help them make sure they not only enter e-commerce, but really succeed once they're online. The third opportunity is finance. Again, like the rest of the fintech world, we saw that women entrepreneurs were less likely to leverage integrated platform financing than men. So for instance, in Africa, we saw about 7% of women had applied for a Jumia loan, whereas about 11% of men did. And that's even though women were actually more likely to be approved once they did apply. So we need to make sure that that gender kind of financial gap doesn't continue into the e-commerce world. And again, it's another opportunity for e-commerce platforms to grow not just their kind of sales of goods, but to also kind of build up their kind of fintech product lines as well. The fourth is high value sectors. Again, we don't want just women selling anything online, but really the opportunities that are going to make them the most profit, and particularly to transition into male-dominated sectors. The last but not least, we really encourage the private sector to gather sex disaggregated data. This type of analysis and really kind of dedicated support to women is only possible if you know where the women are. So we encourage everyone to really look at women-owned businesses so you can kind of support them and make sure that they are really the leaders of the future. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Alexa.
No, that's it. And thank you all. And just a quick note that if you want to hear more, there's much more on ifc.org/digital to equal. And Isabel, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Alexa. That was fascinating. And it's an absolutely brilliant way to begin our panel discussion, having had these introductions and Alexa's presentation, because we're going to delve a little deeper into how small and medium-sized digital businesses can work towards playing a key role and a more inclusive role in this digital transformation. And we're going to take a global perspective on this. We're going to be having voices from the Americas, Africa, and Europe. And we are going to have a designated Q&A session at the end of our panel discussion. So do send in your questions if you have any for our speakers. And so let me begin now by introducing our speakers. You saw them at the beginning of the introduction. But in this introduction, I'd ask you just to very briefly tell us a little bit about what you're bringing to our discussion, so those listening in can gauge where you're coming from, I guess. So Danielle Lagarde is the Vice Minister of Foreign Trade of Ecuador. And if I could ask you in about just 1 minute, give us your little bit of presentation about yourself.
Thank you, Isabel, to all of you. And it's an honor for me to be joining this panel and this event, especially for who is joining me in the panel. Actually, I've read some of the bios and all the upcoming for this person. So it's an honor. So from the perspective of Ecuador and from the public sector, I'm actually the Vice Minister for Foreign Trade. And as foreign trade, we engage in many activities. And one of those is e-trade. But this is also crossed by some policies in the public sector about women empowerment and the gender equality. So it's a very important issue for all of us in the public sector and in the public policies being implemented in many Latin American countries and specifically in Ecuador. What we are working on is bringing the environment for a woman more suitable for the for power and empowerment, for women empowerment, I'm sorry, and for gender equality across the policies that are our responsibility in terms of trade. This is trade agreements from policy perspective internally, also in terms of e-trade, e-commerce, and joined by some other authorities. So this is just a short resume, if you will say, about what we're doing and what we're bringing to the table right now.
Thanks so much. In some respects, creating that infrastructure that Dorothy was talking about earlier on. Now, Amina Ali is CEO of Airside. Now, tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Isabel. It's a pleasure to be with you here today with UNCTAD. So I'm coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area, and my company is focused deeply on how we establish identity in a digital manner. So as the ability to prove who you are has changed from analog to digital, there's a rich discussion to be had on how do you do so in the correct way. And in today's conversation, how do you do so in a way that enables success for small business, both in terms of the owners of the small business, as well as the transactions that they would conduct either online or in person. So we spend a lot of our time thinking about identity proofing and sharing and what that looks like in the digital age.
Okay, fascinating. So it's interesting to see how you're all going to kind of work with each other and help us understand how to move ahead. And Titi Akinola is Director of Operations at the Tony Elumelu Foundation. Hi there, Titi.
Hello, and thank you. It's my honor to be here today. And I work, like you said, with the Tony Elumelu Foundation. And what we do is we identify, we train, and we provide seed capital to entrepreneurs across all 54 African countries. And then we go on to mentor these entrepreneurs that have been provided seed capital to. And in doing that, we ensure that we bring the gender lens into focus to ensure that the female African entrepreneur is not left behind, and we are closing that gap. And so far, we have empowered over 16,000 entrepreneurs across Africa, with 44% of them being women. And last year alone is when we actually brought even more of the gender closure gap into play, where almost 70% of all the beneficiaries, which is about 5,000 beneficiaries last year, were women. So we continue to ensure that we are gender focused, although we want to empower African entrepreneurs, be it men or women, but we recognize the constraints that women have across Africa, especially. There's that social constraint that comes into play. And in doing that, we continue to encourage and target and provide campaigns in addition to what we do, to women to come onto the program, to learn the desired skills and to get a mentor. And we also try to get our female mentors on board as well, just in case, women to women mentorship might be a preference.
That's certainly bearing fruit. As you say, that's quite remarkable progress. And Ulane Vulemets, you're Head of Business Development and e-Residency in Estonia. I gather you're in Marrakesh now, but tell us a little bit about what e-residency is and what your experience can bring to our discussion.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm actually coming at you from Essaouira in Morocco, so very close to Marrakesh. But I represent Estonia, a very small but a very digital country with 1.3 million people. We have managed to create 10 unicorn companies out of Estonia, but our digital success is not only in the private sector but also in the public sector. And the residency program is one of our sort of public sector startups or innovations that I'm representing currently. But I'm not here only as a government representative. I'm here as a former female entrepreneur, having built two businesses that relied largely on internet sales of tourism products. So I'm here also as a mother and a female entrepreneur to add like a more practical side of things to the discussion.
Fantastic. Well, look, let's get stuck straight into that discussion. And Daniel, we began by talking about your experience of what's going on in Ecuador. Can you give us an overview of the entrepreneurial landscape in Ecuador and how these new technologies are now being used?
Thanks again, Isabel, and all of you. So in Ecuador, as many countries, especially in Latin America, I don't know if many of you knew that, but Ecuador is one of the countries that has one of the highest levels of entrepreneurial activity from people, especially from women. But of course, this has to be correctly channeled by public policy and by opportunities in the private sector. And that's where the challenge in public policies come from. So in terms of trade, on what we are doing right now, we are trying to align the trade policies also to empowerment and to foster the policies for women inclusion. From the pandemics, since the pandemics in 2020, environment has changed a lot. The ecosystem has changed a lot. The e-commerce ecosystem has been fostering and growing a lot faster than it was before. It has doubled. It's still a low fraction of our GDP and of our private sector sales. In terms of sales, it has grown from like around 2% of the GDP or 2.5% of the GDP, almost to 6% to GDP. But this jump has been only in the last year and a half, so that's a lot to also highlight. But there's still a lot way to go in a small country for such as Ecuador and among countries in Latin America. So what we are doing for these to grow and also include women is we are enforcing a national strategy for e-trade, for electronic commerce, aligned with the objectives of the trade policies in Ecuador. So the trade policies in Ecuador right now, it's very open, and we are following a lot of trade agreements to foster the inclusion of our country in the international markets. But this is coming along with also opportunities for women, and specifically with international trade. In many of the trade agreements that we are negotiating right now, some of them are already into force. We have a specific chapter in terms of gender equality, and another one in terms of electronic commerce. And this is very important because it's very new for the country, but it's full of opportunities that we are trying to engage. We are learning from the outside environment and from other experiences in other countries to try to implement this in our country as well. Our main goal through these national strategy for e-commerce, it's marked by 4 mainly objectives that has been from public consultations. This has to do with infrastructure, of course, as you were saying. In terms of infrastructure, I'm talking about also the regulatory environment, but also some physical infrastructure as well. Second of all, it's the payment system. As I believe Amina was saying, there's a difference in terms of digital trading in its first steps, you will say, and a complete full digital ecosystem in which many people, especially entrepreneurs, start by small steps by selling their products via WhatsApp or other web pages, but this is not completely the full environment that we are searching for. So we have to advance in terms of digital inclusion, and this means also electronic payments. This is a challenge in a country with Ecuador because there's a lot of regulation to overcome and to advance in this. Then the third one is a special focus on SMEs, which we believe is the most important sector and has the most opportunity to grow, but also it's the biggest gap that we need to fill because of their capacities and their little knowledge in some cases about the how to digitalize the company or at least one part of it. Of course, it's easier than a bigger company because it's smaller to deal with. But there are several programs, some of them joined also by international cooperation that I've been following. And this is, I would say, this is one of the most important components where the gender variable comes in, because there's a lot of focus on women-owned small SMEs and women-owned enterprises as well. And also the international cooperation is focusing a lot on this one. And then the last one would be like the last mile, which is transport, because we still need a physical part on all these trade ecosystems. And I would say this is also a difficult one because of the reality of this sector, especially in countries like Latin America, when there's a lot of informality going on. And we have to overcome this along with other policies that are for these sectors. I'm talking about the transport sector. So this is just the main components that our national strategy is working on in terms of digital trade, and all of these are crossed by the gender equality policy because the government is strongly committed with this environment. But I would say that the main driver of all this is the insertion of Ecuador in the international economy, in the world's economy, especially with what the COVID has bring as challenges, but also as some opportunities, specifically for SMEs.
Okay, so COVID has accelerated kind of like a digital transformation, but just very briefly, before we move on to our other speakers, what's your landing point and what's your time scale? You know, when you talk about this strategy, where do you want to be in 5 years' time?
So the strategy started in by the end of 2020. It changed a little bit with the effects of pandemics. We've actually, this was working before pandemics, but we have to change it a little bit to adapt it to the new reality. And it's a 5-year-long strategy, just with 4 of the main pillars, you would say, because there's a lot of challenges, but we wanted to focus on the main ones, because on the contrary, it will be too much effort to make. So we're making progress specifically in the regulatory environment, but by 2025, what we want to do is we want to at least double what the e-commerce means in terms of the economy. This means growing from up to 10% from GDP right now in terms of what the electronic commerce could mean for the internal economy, but also making important steps for digitalizing the payment ecosystem. Actually, we have one of the main in Ecuador, one of the main enterprises that is changing the ecosystem for payments in Latin America, and it's women driven also. And inserting also, especially SMEs through international trade, also by a large component that would mean growing from what it represents now from about less than 1% from our exports to grow these to at least 1% of the total non-oil export in terms of exports made by digital trade. This is just 2 of the main statistics that we want to pursue by the end of this strategy, but mainly these to be an opportunity to overcome poverty and have a more wide set of opportunities for all.
Okay, so some big challenges there, and quite a short timeline if you giving yourself 2025 to double, as you're saying, what e-commerce means in Ecuador. Titi, I'd like to turn to you now, because we were just talking there about the importance of SMEs, and the private sector is kind of seen as key to unlocking economic potential in Africa. So tell us a little bit about what the SME landscape looks like today. It's a big question, but if you can give us a little overview of what it looks like on the continent today.
The SME landscape is building very strong. We have, even just on our program alone, we have over let's see now, every year we have over 200,000 SMEs come on our program. And we know that we're doing very little. We've only hit maybe about 1% of the entire continent itself. In Africa, we have about 1.4 billion people, and we know for the youth population itself is about 30 to 40%, and out of that, we have about 50% of them being SMEs. And especially startups, the startups is becoming increasingly successful, actually, especially when it comes to the fintech industry. So from what we see, we see that in Africa in general, more people that are coming out of the standard university are moving more into entrepreneurship, because there is also, unfortunately, the large population of youths that are unemployed. And with that, we see more of them going into entrepreneurship, and they start small, of course. So about 30% of our population that is in employable age are into entrepreneurship. And like I said, only a fraction of them come onto our platform, and unfortunately, so out of 400,000, in fact, last year we combined 2020 and 2021 program in one, and we had over 450,000 entrepreneurs that came on our platform to apply, being entrepreneurs themselves, of course. And outside of that, over about 8 years, the entrepreneurship program started in the Tony Elumelu Foundation in 2015. We've had about 16,000 of them actually going into the entrepreneurship and pivoting their business and scaling their businesses. And we know that out from them, we had our PwC survey about 1,000 of them, and we know that even then they are creating about 400,000 indirect jobs, direct and indirect jobs. So we know that the SME skill in Africa is increasing weekly, monthly, year in, year out. And we know that the private sector is key to unlocking this. And we always encourage and push the private sector to join hands and collaborate with us to scale and to touch, impact more entrepreneurs across Africa. Our chairman, Mr. Tony Elumelu, also is a businessman himself, and he runs a private sector in Heirs Holdings and in UBA, as a United Bank for Africa. And out of that, the investment is being poured into the entrepreneurship program to fund and to provide seed capital and additional seed capital as well for these entrepreneurs to continually grow. We cannot overemphasize the importance of the private sector, because the public sector cannot do it alone. And it's quite a lot, and we are actually privileged and passionate about ensuring that the SME landscape in Africa is impacted to prosper the economic of Africa. I'll just give you a few examples of some of our SMEs that have come out of the entrepreneurship program. And they are female.
Briefly though, Titi, because we've got a
Yeah,
lot to discuss.
all right. Okay, just wanted to talk about this impressive young lady from South Africa who is into medical products, and she's doing it digitally as well. And I mean, she's manufacturing prosthetics for the medical industries, and this is mind blowing. We've got another one from Benin, who is scaling the e-trade. Actually, we know that trade, especially inter-trade, is very important in Africa especially, and now he's building this digital platform of e-commerce to ensure that trade is more seamless, and I mean, and it's providing logistics, all these e-commerce platforms to all the entrepreneurs, maybe not entrepreneurs, to all Africans, to ensure that these logistics are more seamless. So, sorry, just lastly, we're bringing it on back to the foundation. We run our entire program online as well, knowing that the technology factor comes into play, because we know that women especially they have families to take care of, and they cannot continue, they can't come out into a training facility to take trainings maybe from morning to night. So we build the entire program online on our platform, TEF Connect. And, in your own time, it's self-paced. You can do it in your own time. This is just to encourage more people to get on the program, and especially women that have other things to do apart from the 9 to 5. So yeah, sorry, I know I've taken so much time.
That's fine. No, it's interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again, how the digital platforms allow that flexibility, which can be extremely helpful for women and allow for greater gender parity. Now, this is a conversation, and Isabel Durant is listening in, and I've just said she would just like to make a little comment. So do come and join us.
Thank you, Isabel. I want to ask to the Minister of Trade in Ecuador, and I really warmly welcome the political will of the Ecuadorian government in order to develop a strategy on 4 years. Very nice. But do you have database or material to look how the development of e-commerce will be accompanied by an increasing of number of women in the e-commerce development? So do you have disaggregated data by gender? How could we help you if it's not the case? Because otherwise, it's important that you could really address the problem of payment, infrastructure, transport, etc. But how do you help women to be part of that, and not just development of the e-commerce as such? So do you have material to measure, and which are the sectors where women are involved in this economic development? Do they are in the technological sector, or in the agriculture, or in services? Do you have material on that, just in order to be able to measure the progress in the next years?
Thank you for that important question. So the short answer will be no, we don't have all the information. This is one of the weakness of the public policy as well, and all the help that we can. It's very welcome. We have several programs that are being both by international programs, but also from private sector, that it's being implemented, and they have some information and some data that it's feeding on the public policies. Also by the academy, next week we will be signing an agreement for making, but this is for a specific study about the impacts on labor for the trade policy, and specifically one measurement about the impact on women labor. There are some numbers that the private sector has been developing with some service in last year, but it's not specifically have a lot of content in terms of impact for women. This is something that we are building on the road, and all the help that we can get on this one is very important for measurement and for the direction of the public policy. Since this is very not new, but it's coming fast in our countries, specifically in Ecuador, and there's a lot of capabilities that need to be fulfilled also by the government and public sector. it will be very important to reinforce the tools that we have to measure the impact on women and specifically on e-trade, which will be very important.
Well, thanks so much for Isabel for cutting in there and making that point, and which Daniel has helped us highlight, of the importance of having tools to measure progress, because it's difficult to know how we progress in terms of these issues of e-commerce and kind of digital parity if you can't actually measure what's taking place. But I'd like now to turn to Amina Ali. Now, you've had and held several positions, leadership positions in tech, in terms of digital businesses, and now including at Airside. Where do you see the role of these businesses, including these SMEs we've just been describing and talking about, in terms of being drivers of growth?
Yeah, great question. Small businesses are the engine of the economy on a global basis. So globally, about 90% of businesses are small businesses. And in terms of the number of the jobs that they employ, it's well over 50% here in the US, and it's about 50% globally as well. So it's a really important sector of the economy. And I think in terms of today's discussion, it's really about how can we leverage digital strategies, technologies. Alexa was talking in her research about tools and training and digital e-commerce enablement to actually support and accelerate that. So really, what we spend a lot of our time thinking about is how do you ensure trust in terms of decreasing fraud and increasing access to capital in this digital age, specifically for small businesses, which would then reach out to women and inclusivity. So if you think about the underbanked, for instance, how can you take advantage of digital technologies and digital commerce platforms to meaningfully impact that? So I think there's a whole world of opportunity in terms of using digital identity to both increase access to capital and ensure that there's trust in transactions, in the ability to access goods, services, et cetera, by leveraging digital strategies in a appropriate and secure manner.
And Almina, just briefly now, because I just want to pick up on something Daniel was talking about when he was talking about, COVID pandemic, and also Isabel Durant mentioned it in her introduction. To what extent were you able to kind of harness the new opportunities, surprisingly, that COVID did bring us in terms of this acceleration? To what extent were you able to harness that demand and grow as a result?
Yeah, in a couple of different ways, Isabel. So the origins of our company really come out of the TSA, and therefore the travel sector, particularly, where there's a lot of women involved in delivery of travel goods, services, tourism, what have you. So specific to travel, there have been a couple of opportunities that we really leaned into. Initially, it was really to show proof of vaccination. Started out with proof of testing. Now it's come down to proof of vaccination for entry into a country or whatnot. So we introduced a digital health pass as part of our Airside digital ID. And then subsequently, as we've been working with airlines and the aviation sector in particular, now you've got this confluence of shortage of pilots and staff and crew, all the folks you need to make the airport run and airplanes run, whatever, while at the same time, there's a resurgence and sort of pent up demand for travel and people seeing each other and doing business and whatnot. And so that's leading us into what's called frictionless travel and using biometrics appropriately to both make it safer and faster to get through that airport journey. That's an example of an in-person use case, if you will, for how you can leverage technology and data and digital identity to accelerate and bring improvements. There's also a very natural pairing between payments and identity. How do you know someone is who they say they are? An online transaction, the old KYC, right? Know your customer. So there's ways to do that with biometric binding, with consent and privacy. So now, in addition to focusing on travel, we're really bringing our capabilities for identity proofing and sharing to more online transactions as well.
Okay, so yeah, there's so much opportunity for development there as well. And Ulane, now you're the business development, you lead the business development team at Estonia's pioneering e-residency program. Now, I was fascinated about this when I was reading about it all. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how it all works?
Sure, and actually it's really fascinating to hear about Amina's experience as well, because essentially you are in the same field, but from the private sector side as we are from the public sector side. So Estonia as a country and as a society has enjoyed this range of digital public services for years and years, and it's on a very advanced level. Half of the world is just amazed at like how we deal with our state. We have e-population registry, e-health, e-prescription, e-tax and customs board, e-commercial registry, like everything is online. And so this is all based around this ID code that's given to everyone at birth and a smart card, which is our ID card. So e-residency is nothing but giving the same access or the same opportunities to somebody who's not a resident in Estonia. You could be living anywhere in the world. We have e-residents from 180 plus countries. You could be living anywhere in the world as long as you have a reasonable distance to travel to one of our embassies to pick up the residency card. But essentially you get the same to Estonian public services, and out of them, the most relevant for somebody who doesn't live here is the commercial registry and the tax and customs board, which gives you an opportunity to create an EU-based business without ever physically coming here. So getting access to all of the international e-commerce platforms, payment solutions, everything as an EU business, not as somebody living in anywhere in the world, in any country, right? So that's essentially what e-residency program is about.
And so just tell us, what was the rationale for setting that up? And just to underline, if I understand correctly, e-residency does not allow you to become a physical resident, does it? No.
No, it does not even give you a visa to travel to Estonia or the EU. So the rationale is just the fact that we enjoy these digital services, and for a lot of people from outside of Estonia, which also partly answers like what have we learned from this program and running this program, is that we have a lot of e-residents from old Western European countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, France as well, and for them it's getting access to a very open, very online business environment where there's zero red tape, where everything is rather under-regulated compared to a lot of other countries in the world. So we see a lot of those people who actually just want to take advantage of this, that Estonia can implement those things so quickly and so easily. COVID didn't change much, by the way, in how our country functions. And then there is another big group of e-residents that we see who come from countries outside the EU. And for them, this is really about opportunities. And this is about being respected and trusted within the EU framework. You basically are in the single market area with your EU entity, and that opens a lot more doors than it does being somewhere else. So that's Estonia basically just decided to, as a small country, share that digital infrastructure with those that may not have it. So for us, it's a way of obviously also earning money to our state budget, but at the same time pioneering and preaching this society that can function paperlessly.
It's absolutely amazing. And I can only imagine that, Daniel, you might be listening in here because, you know, as you are honing in on this and developing this, what would you say that governments can do, if you listen to kind of case studies like that of Estonia, to best support the development of these vibrant digital ecosystems?
Is that a question?
I would say
that's a question to Daniel, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing what Estonia has done. By the way, it's incredible. It's more difficult when you have a larger population. This was said by an Estonian official that visited us because we wanted to know also the experience from the country. But of course, it's a wide example worldwide. But I would say that definitely is first of all involve the private sector in this, because they know much more than we as regulators can achieve. And all this can help on focus the public policies as well to encourage some changes. One of the things that Elaine has said is unregulate the environment. This is very difficult to do in our countries, and I could agree with this, and many of the public officials and our minister is agree on deregulating some specific sections, at least of, but this is very difficult because you have also the views from sectors traditionally enforced, some manufacturers and some other sectors that probably still don't understand the whole working of the e-trade policy in the world and how this is reshaping the world. So I would say it's a cultural mainly thing to change, but definitely you have to rely on the new private sector, and specifically on the new unicorns and the new firms that are growing faster in the economy. Listen to them a lot, and this is what we've been doing to have some of the achievements in one of the pillars that I was mentioning, that is the regulatory environment. It's by relying on them and working with the private enterprises, but with them as support for going with the public offices to change some regulations.
Amazing, because, and that really ties in with what Titi was saying in terms of the importance of kind of this collaboration and getting the private sector on board. Now, Titi, if you kind of look across the African continent again and kind of bouncing off what Ulane was saying, what Daniel was saying, are there some countries that you see that are getting it right when it comes to this kind of business environment, and particularly in terms of enabling digital businesses?
Thank you, Isabella. In getting it right, we've seen in recent studies, the increase, especially when it comes to infrastructure and access and connectivity. We see in Kenya, in SA, in Senegal, and perhaps Morocco, where the economy is actually powering their the internet GDP, so to speak. When you are improving on your internet connectivity, you would also encourage more SMEs that are out there to all embrace digital transformation. We've also seen Ghana coming into play as well. In trying to get the access and connectivity right. In Nigeria, actually, as well, there is the increase in the connectivity penetration, and the internet user and e-commerce consumers are also increasing because of the improved infrastructure. But some more of the Eastern and the Northern Africa countries, we see struggle even in our program in terms of accessibility, and the need to always have to go to like a business center to be able to take the program maybe once in a while. But yeah, these countries are actually getting it right and investing even more in the infrastructure to help digitize the small medium enterprises. So yeah, that is good.
Thanks so much, Titi. And so then when it comes to joining those dots, so then, there's this investment infrastructure, and this question is for Amina. How can you ensure that there are more opportunities that are available to women and vulnerable groups in these digital economies? It comes back to what we were saying at the beginning, because a major obstacle for women entrepreneurs in this tech and digital space is kind of access to capital. Access to capital to scale their businesses. So how can those investment opportunities be unlocked?
Yeah, great question. I think the cornerstone for access to capital is understanding who is the person that you're lending to and making an assessment in terms of the riskiness of that investment. And so what needs to happen is what we think of as a reusable ID. And this may be familiar to Ulane, because I think Estonia has done a good job in thinking about a lot of this. But what you really need is verified digital credentials such that you can make those assessments more easily. And in order for that to happen, you need public-private partnerships that would enable private sector companies such as Airside to then be able to verify the identity of a given person using a passport, an EID card, a driver's license, what have you. Combine that with other risk data such as income and employment and credit history and background and things of that nature, and then kind of swizzle all that together in terms of a user-centric, user-controlled identity, such that women and other folks who are underrepresented and underbanked could leverage that to actually expedite their access to capital, because that is the foundation on which these small businesses are built. And I would say conversely, once you get that business going, in order to minimize identity fraud, third-party fraud, first-party fraud, things of that nature, you have to be able to then confirm someone else's identity as you're transacting with them. So that cornerstone of trust, kind of bidirectionally on both sides of the equation, whether it's the bank or the payment company and the entrepreneur, as well as the customers, is really critical to then greasing the skids and getting this flywheel going for these digital transactions.
Alani, then, so Amina was saying, well, look, you've probably had a similar experience. As you were saying, the Estonian environment is particularly amenable to helping kind of women get into this space. What would your comments be?
I actually wanted to reflect back on what Amina was saying, is that it is really about trust and the way we solve this trust, and also reflecting back to what Daniel was saying. You have no idea how many times I've heard that big countries with big populations, they cannot implement something like that. And so it's about trust, and a government puts a stamp on this ID, giving you this it's tied to your biometric, it's tied to your fingerprints. We have verified, we have checked your background by our police and border guard. We know that you are you, and we've taken your fingerprints, and you also have a PIN 1 and a PIN 2, which adds like an extra layer to this card. So it's about like trust, and you know, if you interact with this card, then it gives you this transparency. But Daniel, what Estonia did is that they made this ID card the #1 mandatory ID within the country. So everybody who is 15 years old in Estonia, they do not have to have a passport, but they have to have that ID card, which comes with a digital identity. So the precondition to enforcing something like this is making it compulsory. And just to make it compulsory, that's one very painful step to take. Everybody will be very angry at first, but then everything will be easier later. But to speak about women, there's a couple of things that I think one of the first speakers, I forgot now, mentioned this, but this flexibility of time for women is more crucial than it is for men, because we have so many sort of unwritten responsibilities that we have to take care of the family, the children. Having been an entrepreneur with 3 children, you have no idea how many things I've done during the nap times, during the times when the kids have been in bed. So it's really about being able to do your taxes, submit your reports online, because there is no opening times for the online services. So this flexibility that it really gives women, I think it's crucial. And then the access to capital. Let's say an entrepreneur somewhere, let's say somewhere in an African country wants to raise money to their company. Maybe that access is not available nearby, but having an EU entity, having access to European VC funds, having access to European investors, because you're operating essentially in this jurisdiction that is in EU, opens up a whole bunch of new doors again. So it's really about trust, isn't it?
So ultimately trust. And on that note, because I know Amina is going to have to dash off in just a couple of minutes, I would just like to kind of speak to you all and find out what your final thoughts are. So those who are leaving us now, you know, you've emphasized the issue of trust, Ulane. Amina, what would you think we really should have to keep in our minds when we kind of think back to our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great opportunity to empower women and to empower small businesses with data and digitalization. So how you achieve trust is really a function of what's that trust network you establish between buyer and seller, between the two people to access information. And to us, One of the core requirements for that from a policy perspective is to get digital identity done correctly with privacy and security, such that people are really empowered to prove who they are, and in the digital town square, get the access to the information and establish their businesses.
Thanks so much, Amin, and thanks so much for having joined us today. Can I just move on to you, Titi? What would you like us to really hold on to? What would be a kind of an important idea that you think that maybe we haven't even had the chance to raise yet today?
I think, the importance of access to technology is the greatest key to any success, especially in Africa, where the data, just having access to data is ridiculously expensive or not even available. So it's the appeal to the public sector, to the private sector, to invest in the infrastructure to build for these SMEs out there, to encourage them to get on the digital platform. I mean, it's different for the Western countries, because the facilities are there and infrastructure is there, and especially to help in the changing of the mindset, because I also believe is a mindset. Is when you say trust, Elena, it's really about, for us, is about trusting the system, trusting the technology, to know that it's not that scary, and nobody's going to defraud you of anything. So it's changing the mindset in terms of training, capacity building, to know the usefulness of technology and to embrace it.
It's amazing how all these ideas interlock. Daniel, from your perspective in Ecuador, what would your final thoughts be?
Well, it's been a very enlightening session, Isabel. Thanks for all of that. So there's a lot of challenges within each country to empower digital trade, and also women across this. But there's one specific aspect that needs to be also taken into account, specifically for mid-sized and small countries such as mine and a lot of in Latin America, which is international markets and access to international markets with e-commerce and with digital trade. This wouldn't be enough. All the efforts that we are making as governments in digital trade, in women empowerment, won't be enough if we don't take also the international market access into account. It's not enough inside our countries. And this is the effort that at the end, it's driving our decisions and our actions in the government for international insertion. And of course, this will sum up a lot the objectives in terms of gender equality, in terms of promoting e-trade and the inclusion of the less represented groups.
And then Alani, final word to you before we begin, although we haven't started entirely to close our session. Alani, what would your final thoughts be in terms of this panel discussion we've had?
It's been really, really interesting. And one thing I noticed from my own notes that maybe didn't get airtime before is the fact that digital public services, they reduce also the chance for corruption, which is I think also like an important point to make, that it's not only connected to empowering women, but it's connected to empowering everyone to have a more equal starting place to do business, to achieve something in their lives, because it is really hard to bribe a computer, to bribe an algorithm. So it's something that really creates equal opportunities on all levels if the services are digital.
So absolutely amazing. So we've had such important issues being brought up here, as you're saying, that the digital public services reduce corruption. We've talked about the issue of trust and how important that is, and Titi pointed out how it's also trusting the tech that you have. It's not even just trusting the people who's part of your interface, and the importance of this privacy and security and how that empowers people And then Daniel, who was telling us that, you know, in terms of this digital trade, for it to develop, it can't only be domestic, it has to move beyond borders. Now, I know that Dorothy Tembo has stayed with us and is listening in, and I was just wondering if you would like to add any comments as we close off this panel. I don't know if Dorothy can hear me though.
Can hear you. Thank you very much.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Loud and clear.
Thank you. I think excellent points that have been raised by the different contributors to the discussion this afternoon. Perhaps just to add from our perspective and the experience that we've had in country. I think one is that access to data, in our view, has improved considerably in the last 2 years because we had to get into that mode of being able to see how we can respond in a crisis that was not allowing movement. But the issue that we have observed is the lack of knowledge about what's existing and how that can be utilized to facilitate a trade, particularly for women. Second point is that from our perspective, we have seen a difference in terms of the uptake on the solutions that we are providing. You know, these relate very much to the size of many companies. A company that is able to function on its own in many ways is able to, you know, take up whatever is being offered and try to run with that on their own with minimal capacity building. But I think what we have to focus on is really those small ones that don't have that opportunity of understanding their context and having the necessary tools that will enable them to get to a point where they can actually be able to transact. And here I wanted to pick up on the point that Vice Minister made, which was that we have to take into account the different contexts. Some of the countries we're working with are really starting from basics, especially when you look at the small players. So we've got to customize our solutions to be able to be relevant to the specific situations and be able to be used in a way that is impactful. I think we can have the medium to long-term aspirations, but when I look at what we have in a number of the countries that we are working with, the systems are just non-functional. It's not even about building the trust. So we've got to think about issues that are, as you know, go maybe beyond us, which is why I was putting emphasis on the coordination at the country level and the mindset change. Financing is really key here, particularly for women. I think it's about sourcing the funds. Again, not a lot of information on what is pertaining, but also we need to be innovative because the reality is that these are small companies that are not able to meet the requirements that are linked to accessing the resources. So we've got to be innovative in approach. Blended financing, which integrates the de-risking aspect, is one angle that we have taken as an organization. Perhaps I could stop here for now.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for jumping in there and giving us your closing thoughts. Well, I'd like to invite Isabelle Durant now to deliver her closing remarks. The floor is yours.
Merci. Je vais pas faire des longs.
Thank you. I will not make any lengthy closing remarks. I simply wanted, in fact, to pick up on something that Dorothy just said, and I fully align myself with what she just said. I think that the best illustration of everything we've heard this afternoon is the importance of interaction between technology and its success and the trust that people repose in technology. And these are mutually reinforcing. It's not just because technology is high quality, etc., that it's properly regulated, etc., that it might encourage new entrepreneurs to have trust in all that. It's an important part of the equation. There's also a need to interact with entrepreneurs to make sure that that trust is built through direct relationship with them, and also not just trust in technology, but self-belief as well, trust in themselves to put a foot in the or toe in the water. I was in Estonia in 1998, quite a while ago now, and back then they were already paperless at the governmental and authority level. And it's the government, in fact, the public sector that pulled the private sector behind them. a little bit of reverse of how things normally happen, where the private sector go first and the public sector follows reluctantly behind. But I think here they can be, again, mutually reinforcing, and that there can be this mutual exchange on an ongoing standing basis between the public and private sector. That's important for reinforcing action, for reinforcing this trust. It's also important to take into account the specificities of each country, the different parameters. We've heard from various ministers who've made it clear that what's important is to make sure that SMEs in particular can have access to international markets and not just domestic markets. I heard a great deal said about flexibility, not just flexibility along the lines as described by our resident Estonian, not just flexibility for women to make sure that they can work outside normal working hours, because many women have to, and I'm sure that's true of many other women in the world. I'm sure there was a knowing smile when the point was made that women need flexible working hours because you need to work when their children are sleeping. That may be the reality, but it's a reality that we can change. Why do women have to work when their children are sleeping while men are sleeping when the children are sleeping, etc.? That's an approach that has to be taken, a shared burden of childcare and other care, etc. That's a way of ensuring that women have this necessary flexibility. Flexibility mustn't just be an opportunity for women to work when they're not responsible for the childcare or other care duties. So we perhaps need to change the perspective of flexibility as it works for people, flexibility as they want it, but not to make it normal that women can work online, work from their computer, work from home, only at times when their care responsibilities make that possible for them. It has to be their choice, I think, more positively than that. Another point to make is the tools for payment, infrastructure, transport, logistics, etc., and tools to have access to all of that. These are all worlds we're very much familiar with at UNCTAD. We know where the weaknesses, where the shortcomings are, again, in individual countries, because this is an individual approach. I think we also need statistical tools, statistical instruments. That was a point that was missing in our discussion. If we don't have data, disaggregated data, including data disaggregated by gender, to know where women are working, to know where e-commerce is working for women, and in which other sectors it is lagging behind, in which sectors there is a need to assist enterprises and businesses in expanding. It's not just a question of entrepreneurship launching an enterprise, but also how you can expand a business, expand an enterprise once launched, etc. It's all very well and good to help people set up, but then you need to help them to expand as well, to grow, to seek out better business opportunities. And that also relies on data, relies on statistics to make sure that we have sustainable entrepreneurship, sustainable commercial ventures at all levels, including the SME level and the women-led level. So I think the measurement tools are also very important, so that we can measure over time progress that has been made, sectors in which we need to focus our development efforts, and have figures and statistics to prove that the tools we're using, the measures we're taking are working. And they're working, as I say, not just at an initial stage of enabling women to enter the market, but also to hold the course in the market and to have and to make sure that their businesses are durable. I think on all of these issues, ITC and UNCTAD, who are permanently working together from our different mandates, from our different perspectives in these areas, we are here to work with you, to be a clearinghouse, to be a partner, to be a forum for sharing experiences, to identify weak points, to identify success stories, and also perhaps to help you with statistics, information, to act as a clearinghouse for those tools as well. We also have a help desk which can provide you with information on non-tariff measures, for example, which is very useful for those who want to take the leap into international e-commerce, to understand what measures, regulations they need to be able to meet in order to export the goods that they're trading in, for example. And in all of that, we will do our utmost to help you, to support you, to help and support governments, public authorities, the private sector, and women. I will leave it there by way of conclusion. Thank you.
For that great conclusion, bringing all the threads of our discussion together. And what's wonderful to hear really is the opportunity. I think that's a word that came up again and again, the opportunities at hand, but clearly there are challenges. But as Isabel Johar was saying, there is a toolbox there, and there are instruments to help the project along, different countries' projects who are on different parts of that journey, as we were again hearing. But the important message, I think, is there is opportunity, and we have examples of what those success stories are, and they can be important in terms of learning and moving ahead and reaching more successful outcomes. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today in what's been an absolutely fascinating hour and a half. Of course, Isabel Durand, Dorothy Tembo, but of Daniel as well, Ulane, Titi, and Armina, who has had to dash off. But thank you so much to everybody for this discussion. And please stay in touch with any comments you might have. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. I'm on Twitter. But thank you very much for inviting me to host this discussion.